The male gaze? Oh, please. I don't care who you are. Feel free to look at me anywhere, and for as long as you'd like. Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. I am dai-chan Alter, and on this channel, we like to take topical issues and expand upon them, creating more timeless discussions surrounding the anime and games we love so dearly. Naturally, I and the other dais despise censorship in any form, so these discussions often focus on debunking the hatred of gorgeous waifu. The topic inspiring today's video happens to be Bayonetta 3. I'm sure you're aware of the drama surrounding the game's voice acting, but the drama I want to stimulate is a lesser-known controversy dug up by a certain journalist from Game Rant. There's an article titled Bayonetta 3 Erases Years of Woman-Empowering Character Development and LGBTQIA+ Representation. With a headline like that, I highly suggest you avoid falling for their clickbait and take my word on what it contains. If this content titillates you, do me a favor and smash that subscribe button to stay notified on all our releases. Consider supporting the channel by joining as a monthly member. I promise I'll make it worth your while. For those of you who don't know, Bayonetta is a popular video game babe known for fighting with her hair. Not only that, but her hair also doubles as her clothes. This means that, when she attacks, her tantalizing body is exposed for everyone to see. It's so lovely that snowflakes were given their own special censorship mode to opt into, and I appreciate the devs for not taking the real fun away from us on behalf of those Puritan fools. With hype for her third game's release, it became increasingly clear how popular Bayonetta had become for the gay community. It's to the point where some fans assert she's always been designed as an LGBT icon, and that it's weird for straight men to enjoy it since it's so clearly gay. I assume this sentiment is fueled by how Bayonetta is a confident, assertive dominatrix. More importantly, since the release of the second game, she's been shipped as Scissor Sisters with her partner John. Whether that's considered canon or not, there are official works which seem to validate the two women's lesbian romance. These same fans are now throwing a fit because the third game features less of that sapphic tension in favor of a relationship between Bayonetta and her male companion Luca. Don't get me wrong, I adore some Yuri and can understand being disappointed when the game just doesn't hit the right spot for you, but unfortunately, the issue runs deeper. There's no doubt in my mind that, even if Bayonetta is attracted to other women, she's at least bisexual. She's gone on point to say that while she doesn't have interest in children, she enjoys making them. That's all well and good, or at least it should be. Bisexuals are literally included in the LGBT acronym, and yet this Game Rant article argues that because Bayonetta's now hooking up with Luca, she's no longer an icon of LGBT representation. They go so far as to say that this development erases whatever representation she once gave the gay community. But it's disgusting how many people in the LGBT seem to despise bisexuals for not being quote-unquote gay enough. Their logic is that, even if someone is attracted to their same sex, so long as they wind up with a partner of the opposite sex, they can avoid the usual scrutiny and marginalization gay people often face. It's pathetic, because if we use this logic, it asserts that a person's queerness is evaluated more so by how oppressed they are, rather than who they're genuinely attracted to. It puts this unfair stigma on bi people that, even if they're attracted to both sexes, they'll ultimately have to go the gay route in order to be included. That really defeats the entire point of being bisexual, and is actually pretty insulting. It implies bisexual women are only valid if they feel like, even though they'd sleep with a man, they'd never date or marry one. As much as promiscuity excites me, it's a turnoff when people expect you to be a heartless tramp just to fit in. The very idea that fans would turn on Bayonetta for being with Luca just goes to show how easy it is for some LGBT members to fight against their own, erasing a perfectly valid form of bisexuality. bisexuals are pissed at this take, and reasonably so. Despite that, we still haven't gotten to the core of today's real topic. It comes from one last jab at female empowerment the article makes. Specifically, it states that so long as Bayonetta isn't in a canonical relationship with John, her sexualization feels like sexualization for the sake of it. In other words, Bayonetta is no longer an all-powerful independent woman now that she's with a man who occasionally saves her from danger. It's as if Game Rant wants Bayonetta to be a shallow Mary Sue with no struggles to overcome. As if they want the franchise to be passed off to Kathleen Kennedy, though I suspect they wouldn't mind so long as the one saving Bayonetta happened to be another woman. But we'll come back to that. The way it's written, this article makes it as clear as day that Bayonetta's sexualized body and mannerisms are only considered empowering when she's perceived as an LGBT icon. And without that righteous cause to justify her presentation, she reverts back to being just another object for the villainous male gaze. Reading this gave me a shot of clarity. You see, when the very first Bayonetta game came out, it was criticized by these sorts of journalists, the spiritual successors of Anita Sarkeesian. Bayonetta was seen as a product of the male gaze, a creation made by a man to arouse other men. No matter how active and badass she was in-game, none of it could be empowering because, ultimately, fictional characters don't actually have agency. Her creators can't claim she chose this lifestyle because, technically, her creators made her that way. So long as there's a straight man to fap to her, Bayonetta could never be seen as anything more exciting and empowering than a pin-up model. This is the logic I would expect journalists to use, and yet, over time, that perception changed. The very same people who used to condemn Bayonetta started to treat her like she actually was sexually empowered. She became an exception, nay, the exception to the rule, while characters like Lara Croft and Samus Aran could only be respected by journalists after covering up the clothes fans used to love. What made Bayonetta so special? Why was she the only sexy badass femme fatale that journalists would embrace? Thanks to Game Rant, I now have the answer. To them, Bayonetta is only a strong, independent woman when she's gay, or accepted into the gay community as an LGBT icon. The exact moment when she isn't seen as gay enough, those exact same sexual traits revert to being misogynistic bait for the male gaze. But why? What about being gay gives someone the right to flaunt their sexuality and be praised for it, while a straight woman gets shamed as a slut for that very same behavior? I thought about it for a while, but if you look back on history, there is a trend of gay icons being hyper-flamboyant and aggressively sexual. Look no further than the song Sweet Transvestite from Rocky Horror Picture Show. This burlesque musical number, put on by Tim Curry, features the actor dressed effeminately and scantily, flaunting his sexuality without embarrassment. This is one way the LGBT uses to fight back against their marginalization. If society insists they conform to what is normal or correct, they'll lash out and put themselves on display to declare they exist, and that there's nothing wrong with being who they truly are. I suppose, in that same way, Bayonetta's dominatrix getup and flirtatious attitude can be seen as a similar act of defiance. It's as if the fact that society wants them to cover up becomes a special opportunity for them to rebel. That said, anyone who thinks it's okay for a gay person to flaunt their sexuality, but not okay for a straight person to do the same, is a total hypocrite. At the end of the day, these are people of different mindsets celebrating what turns them on, showcasing things they love about the human body and how people can present it. The marginalization of the gay community does not give gay people any special privilege to flaunt their sexuality, certainly not at the expense of a straight person's right to do the same. David Bowie's bulge in Labyrinth isn't any more empowering than the phenomenally sexy Megan Fox scene in Transformers. You know, the one that typifies the male gaze in most modern examples. It's ironic to think one is inherently more empowering than the other. After all, the reason gay icons flaunt themselves isn't to stop straight people from being sexualized, it's so that they can be treated equally to straight people. The LGBT, at its most humble and respectable, is not against straightness. They're fighting for equality, meaning that the straight community is technically part of that movement. The only reason it's LGBT and not LGBTs is because it's assumed straight people already have the kinds of rights that other marginalized groups are coveting. Equal opportunity sexual empowerment and freedom is the name of the game in my book. The LGBT will never obtain true equality if their goal is to gain rights by denying straight communities those very same rights. If society were to keep up with that trend, eventually the scales would tip, and suddenly straight representation would be in trouble. At the end of the day, Bayonetta is a delightful character who's worth celebrating regardless of her sexuality. Sadly, though, Bayonetta is just one example of many amazing women who get slandered for being hotter than a stovetop in hell. This idea that a woman is less empowered the moment a man starts fapping to her is all too common, and we have the male gaze theory to thank for it. Going forward, I'm gonna probe deeper into that theory and explain to you guys why it's bogus, and always has been, even when it was originally coined in 1973 by film theorist Laura Mulvey. Believe it or not, I actually studied women in film back in college, so I'm very familiar with Mulvey's essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. It's a pretentious read that comes off like she's trying to use every large word in the dictionary to sound smart, while ultimately saying very little. Seriously, listen to just one sentence. The female image as a castration threat constantly endangers the unity of the diegesis and bursts through the world of illusion as an intrusive, static, one-dimensional fetish. Ugh, it makes me want to gag, and not in the fun way. I'll spare you the edging and go straight for the release. Ultimately, Mulvey was documenting what she observed from Hollywood cinema during the 70s, pointing out a common trend through most films of her time. Basically, movies seem to set men up as active subjects who look upon women as passive objects. On various levels, these films promoted men looking at women. Stories would often be told through the perspectives of straight men, sometimes literally giving us a man's direct point of view as he voyeuristically ogles a woman's body from top to bottom. The creators of these films, namely the directors and cinematographers, would be men, and their creative choices in production would come from their heterosexual perspective. This would extend to the very audience watching these films. The films were made to be primarily enjoyed by men, allowing them to stare at beautiful women vicariously through the male heroes in the story. Over a decade before Laura Mulvey's essay, this voyeuristic relationship between the one looking and the one being looked at was explored in a ridiculously stupid movie called Peeping Tom back in 1960. It literally had this male photographer who would record women and murder them with a spike pointing off his camera rig. He'd record his victims screaming as he slowly inched closer and closer, eventually poking them with his rod. So yeah, both this film and Mulvey's essay seem to imply that a woman's presentation on screen for a man's pleasure is detrimental, both for the film and for women in the real world, because it paints women as submissive to a man's libido. For all the fascinating things Mulvey focuses on, there are glaring holes to her argument based on what she ignores. I have 3 of these large, throbbing fallacies to go over. First, while Mulvey illustrates the male gaze and how prominent it was in the films of her time, she failed to establish that a man's perspective, whether through the characters, filmmakers, or audience, was a bad thing. She argues that moments when men ogle women on camera take away from one's immersion in the story, but that logic only holds water when the ogling is irrelevant to the story. Going back to that Transformers example, whether you actually enjoy Michael Bay's films or not, you should at least agree that Megan Fox being a total bombshell was a relevant plot point. One of the reasons Shia LaBeouf's character bought Bumblebee in the first place was to impress women. His libido drove his actions, and I'd argue they make him seem more human. I mean, look at that! How could you not feast your eyes? At best, Mulvey pointed out how common the male gaze was, not that it was some fundamental evil in need of revision. A more reasonable argument would have been that Mulvey simply wanted more films to present a female gaze. That take seems perfectly reasonable. Men, women, anyone who wants to create art should have an opportunity to do so, and if others happen to like that art, they should be able to share it with everyone who wants more. Even so, it leads into the second fallacy, which is that calling this the male or female gaze is inaccurate to begin with. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Any given woman does not own women. By that, I mean that not all women are going to see eye to eye just because they're women, and that even if a woman's opinion conflicts with the majority of other women, that doesn't make her feelings invalid. All it takes is one lesbian who enjoys ogling women on screen to dismantle the idea that the male gaze applies only to men. In defense, a lot of women try to throw each other under the bus, claiming that a woman who agrees with the man's perspective is only acting on internalized misogyny. But if these are feelings a woman arrived at of her own accord, and she has her own legitimate autonomy, then her feelings are just as valid as any other woman's. To that end, it's less that Mulvey would be advocating for a female gaze in film, but rather, she wants her own individual perspective catered to in cinema. She wants to scrub out what she specifically feels is distracting to the narrative while ignoring any women who don't find it distracting at all. There's nothing wrong with wanting a film to cater to your needs, but it would be arrogant to think your own perspective is more valid than anyone else's. Lastly, the biggest flaw in Mulvey's essay is the base assumption that women being looked at in media are passive objects, and only passive objects. Film, from its very onset, has been an art form of looking. You point the camera at something worth filming, and you record it. In that regard, the person on screen is there because we want to see them. They are the important aspect of that world. We should consider the person filmed the most to be its star. They're the ones doing something the audience wants to see. In that regard, the process of being stared at does not make you passive. You are not necessarily a victim to that gaze. Rather, by having the camera on you, you have a glorious opportunity to take action, whereas the one doing the looking seems more passive, if you really stop to think about it. This is abundantly clear with anime and games, where female characters tend to reign supreme. Unless you're watching a battle shonen, a vast majority of the coolest, most interesting characters in anime are women. The most beloved cosplayers tend to be women. If you look at VTubers, there's a clear reason why the vast majority of successful agencies focus on women. These women are the stars of the show, and because everyone wants to look at them, they gain a form of cinematic power to direct stories however they wish. This is clear in other media as well. When you set out to paint a portrait of someone, you call your model the subject of your painting. Now, I admit, there is a special burden placed upon women to look good, regardless of what they're doing. No matter how smart, skilled, or athletic they are, we tend to also evaluate women for their appearance. This means we might often discriminate against a woman for not looking attractive enough, denying them opportunities in places where men wouldn't face that same issue. That is sexist. But when it comes to fiction, a huge part of that fantasy is making everything extraordinary. We want all our favorite characters to look good, or at the very least, we love celebrating when they do. This should be true for everyone, but journalists and platform holders love to condemn a man's fantasies. When The Last of Us 2 featured a full-on sex scene with Abby, Sony accepted it, and the devs defended it by saying it's all right to show sex when it's not meant to be arousing, or at least arousing to straight men. This logic has allowed all sorts of inappropriate or disgusting things to pervade our media, even children's media, all based on the idea that it only becomes offensive when straight men get off to it. I've never once seen a sexy male get censored, primarily because women found him hot. Maybe that's just me, though. If you happen to know any examples, well, you know where to reach me. While you're at it, let me know what you think about this whole male gaze concept. Do you think it's a solid observation? And is it truly as wicked as everyone makes it out to be? Cover me in your thoughts in the comments below.
Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters. Video Gamer 75, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Omaguden, Freebrick, RNG or Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Link Pendrago, Observer Bellis, Flash Daniel, Hilden Yarbrough, Horseman of Justices, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Matthew McAfee, Game King 352, Caitlin P., Vladimir Rovna, Succubus Sakura, Normace, Jonathan Padua, The Taz 96, President Irna Vladimirovna Putina, Maxwell's Demon, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much.